autism spectrum disorder. Okay, so let's talk about, let's stick with the face, shall we? What other kind of information can we get off the face? Well, Ekman told us about information about people's emotional states. Let's look at the problem of facial beauty, the facial attractiveness. The most powerful determinant of whether we're going to like somebody or not is whether he or she is physically appealing. And by physically appealing, we're talking mostly about the face. Physical attractiveness is the most powerful determinant of likability, and as I'll point out a little bit later in more detail, it's interesting because this influences all sorts of other judgments. There's a phenomenon known since the 1920s, known longer than that, called the halo effect. We tend to think about positive attributes as being correlated with each other, positive attributes hanging together. So if we perceive that a person has one socially desirable attribute, we tend to infer that he or she will have other socially desirable attributes as well. Physical attractiveness is one of these socially desirable attributes, obviously. And when we see somebody who's physically attractive, the first thing we're likely to assume is that he or she has other positive qualities. Is smarter than the average bear, is more friendly than the average person, and so on. So another topic for the study of social perception is to try to figure out what exactly makes a face attractive. What's the difference between attractive faces and unattractive faces? And we can talk about the various kinds of features and so on that go into making a face perceived as beautiful. But there's been a long-standing mystery precisely why those particular features are important. Make no mistake about it, there's a tremendous amount of consensus as to what constitutes physical beauty, especially physical beauty on the face. But trying to figure out exactly what underlies these judgments has been a mystery for a long time. Ellen Berscheid and Elaine Walster, the two social psychologists who are the most prominent experts on the psychology of interpersonal attraction, ended their classic book on this in 1974 with a flat-footed statement that we have no idea, no answer to the question of what constitutes beauty. Tremendous amount of progress has been made since 1974, mostly the work of Judith Langlois, a psychologist, now a dean at the University of Texas, who's argued somewhat counterintuitively that the key to facial attractiveness is averageness. Okay, that we tend to perceive average faces as more attractive than non-average faces. And there are a couple of different theories that would lead to this conclusion. For example, evolutionary theory says that over time, natural selection is going to produce a kind of, it's going to have a kind of normalizing influence. Natural selection is going to take out the extremes and give you something that's very close to the average. And that means that mate selection will prefer averages to non-average the stimuli. But cognitively, there's a theory called prototype theory that basically argues that when we encode information about categories of objects, what we do is we represent categories of objects by their central tendencies, by what the average bird looks like, or what the average automobile looks like, or what the average college professor looks like, or whatever. And when we see somebody who looks average, we tend to like that person more. So we know that people prefer familiar objects to unusual objects. So is that really the case? Well, it turns out to be the case. Langlois and her colleagues gathered together a whole bunch of photographs, headshots, full face-forward shots of people, digitized them, controlled all other aspects of the photograph, and then put them one on top of another in a kind of composite. You kind of match up the location of the pupils of the eyes and a couple of other things, and then you just digitally put these faces one on top of another so that you had 5 different levels of averaging. A stimulus that's at the average of 2 faces, 2 randomly selected faces, a stimulus that's an average of 4 or 8 or 16 or best yet 32 faces. This is what these things look like. So what we've got are composites of 4 faces and 8 faces, 16 faces, and 32 faces, all kind of put on top of each other here. And then the subjects are simply asked to rate how physically attractive each of these faces is. So 4-face composite, 8-face, 16-face composite, 32-face composite. And the answer is that the more faces that went into the composite, the more attractive the face appears to be. So here on if I remember correctly, it's a 5-point scale. Individual faces get average ratings of about 2.5. 2-face composites go up. 8-face composites go up even more. 32-face composites for both males and females are the most highly ranked. So this is the kind of evidence that Langlois and her colleagues would use to come to the conclusion that what really makes a face attractive, counterintuitively, is its averageness. The closer you get to the average, the better your average is, the more attractive the face is. Yeah. Oh, yes, yes. Well, when you construct these stimuli, what you want to do is you want to keep the races, pardon the expression, separate, because that's just going to screw up your stimulus materials. You're going to, for example, you put some black faces together with white faces, you get a facial texture that's not real or whatever. So what they would do in these experiments is they take a whole bunch of white faces and put them together, a whole bunch of black faces, put them together, a whole bunch of Asian faces, put them together. But it doesn't matter what face you're looking at, black, white, brown, whatever. The bigger the composite that underlying the face, the more attractive that face looks. Okay? And it's a very, very, very robust effect. So again, Berscheid and Walster in 1974 say there's no answer to the question of what constitutes beauty. Langlois and her colleague wrote just 16 years later, we got the answer. Okay? Attractive faces represent the central tendency or the average members of the category of faces. And again, there's something about the physical stimulus that gives rise to this perception of facial beauty. Now, remember, there are at least 2 reasons why this might be true. There's an evolutionary, a reason rooted in evolutionary theory and a reason rooted in cognitive theory. So now we can go on and try to figure that out. Randy Thornhill and Steve Gangestad, 2 evolutionary psychologists working together, have argued that the reason average faces are perceived as more attractive has to do with the effect of natural selection on mate selection. Okay, who you're going to mate with. And what they argue is that what people are really looking for is what's known as facial symmetry. They're looking for faces that look the same on both sides, because in general, body symmetry is a marker of health and reproductive fitness and fecundity, how many children you're likely to have. And so they argued that what happens here is that the reason averaging makes faces more attractive is that averaging, by virtue of being an averaging process, eliminates any asymmetries that are going to be. It's just going to be noise in the data. And especially what the evolutionary psychologists call fluctuating asymmetries. Something appears on one side of the face of one individual and another side of the face on another individual, and so on. So here's a clear hypothesis. This is just an example of this. Probably the most famous symmetrical face in all of art history is this bust of Nefertiti, who was thought to be the most beautiful woman in the world at the time. You can see that she's presented here as perfectly symmetrical. That's true in other statues, the statue representations of her as well. I myself have some doubts about this, okay? Because if you look at photographs of people who are by consensus usually thought of as pretty attractive, the first thing that stands out on you was fluctuating asymmetry, okay? Here is Marilyn Monroe with this big zit on her cheek. The people would call it a beauty mark, but an evolutionary psychologist would call it a fluctuating asymmetry, okay? Here's Cindy Crawford, and she has one too. Nobody would want to mate with these individuals, right? Because it's fluctuating asymmetry. Almost certainly not true, okay? But that's just an intuition. We can actually do experiments on this. Gillian Rhodes at the University of Christchurch did this work, again using this computer averaging technique, varying the degree of averageness, and she collected from her subjects not just ratings of physical attractiveness, but also ratings of physical symmetry. And what she was able to do is to analyze the relationship between symmetry and attractiveness, pleasantness and attractiveness, each using a statistical technique that we don't have to go into here, statistically controlling for the other one. And what you discover when you do that is that the correlation of attractiveness with averageness is pretty high in the 70s or in the mid-70s, but the correlation of physical attractiveness with symmetry is much lower, only in the 40s, okay? So that suggests that the primary determinant of physical attractiveness is not symmetry as such. The primary determinant of physical attractiveness is averageness. Yeah, symmetry makes some contribution, but it's not a strong contribution as the Marilyn Monroe and Cindy Crawford examples illustrate. So again, in Rhodes' analysis, both averageness and symmetry make some contribution to ratings of physical attractiveness, but by far, averageness is the more powerful determinant. And the attractiveness of average faces is not an artifact of symmetry. It's something that comes into play over and above symmetry. Question? There is some research on that, but I think it all depends on what the feature exactly is, okay? And how you're going to define exaggeration of a feature. Big nose, for example, does not necessarily make a face more attractive. Some people like big puffy lips, other people don't like big puffy lips. So there is a literature on this, right? Because people keep trying to tweak this, right? Not least the makeup industry wants to do this, male and female. What I'm trying to do now is just kind of introduce you to the broad brushstrokes here. But yeah, you can probably find this. Again, there have to be contradictions to this because there are some people whose faces are strikingly beautiful, but you would not want to call them average in any sense, right? So there have to be exceptions here. But as a general rule, and again, counterintuitively, we tend to like what we encounter a lot, right? And what we encounter a lot, almost by statistical definition, is the average face. Okay. So again, the averageness effect on ratings of facial attraction is not an artifact of symmetry. And Rhodes actually has this flat-footed statement in this paper I cited. Our results settle the dispute. You hardly ever see a psychologist say, my results settle the dispute. But hers seems to, at least in her mind. Okay, so again, why is facial attractiveness important? Well, it's important for the mating game. Obviously, we tend to be attracted to people, we tend to want to mate with people who are physically attractive. But again, from a wider perspective, the reason physical attractiveness is important is that it provides information about other aspects of the person. There's this halo effect, first noticed by L.L. Thurstone, that we believe that socially desirable characteristics tend to be positively correlated. If you've got one socially desirable characteristic, you're going to have other socially desirable characteristics. So that people tend to assume that there's a positive correlation between physical beauty, physical attractiveness, and also attractiveness on other dimensions, on the social dimension of warmth versus coldness, and on the intellectual dimension of smart versus non-smart. This is, of course, an empirical question, whether there really is such a correlation, okay? But that's not the point. The point is we tend to believe that there is such a correlation, so that when we see somebody who's physically attractive, we tend to think that they're both friendly and smart, and that's what person perception is all about. What can you do with this person? Let's do another one very quickly, again, sticking with the face. This is work on baby-facedness by Leslie Zebrowitz. She changed her name at one point. And again, there is a particular combination of facial features that we associate with baby-facedness, and this occurs across a lot of different species. Here's a line drawing of a human infant and an adult male, a rabbit, baby rabbit, adult rabbit, baby dog, adult dog, baby bird, baby pigeon, and adult pigeon. This kind of roundedness, the prominence of the eyes, all of these are cues to this, what we call this baby-facedness. And again, what MacArthur and Zebrowitz, that's the same person, changed her name in the middle of this line of research. What she did was to prepare a number of line drawings in which she varied the baby-facedness of the stimulus and then asked people to make inferences about what kind of person this is. And what she discovered, here's some other examples of this. So again, this is a more baby-faced stimulus than this, less angularity, a little wider than longer. And it turns out that when you ask people to rate how powerful the individual is, baby-faced people are rated as less powerful than so-called mature-faced people. When you ask people how warm they are, you actually get, at least for female stimuli, baby-faced women are tended to be perceived as more warm than mature-faced women. And when you look at ratings of masculinity, baby-faced men and baby-faced women are perceived as less masculine than so-called mature-faced males or females. So again, what people are doing here is reading information about the person's internal states, how warm they are, how powerful they are, how masculine they are, from features of the face. How good a child caretaker you are, the more baby-faced the female, the better she's perceived as a child caretaker. So again, we're talking stereotypes here, obviously, right? The whole basis for this effect is social stereotypes about masculinity and femininity, but that's the point. People are making inferences from physical appearance. Okay, so ratings of the financial provider. Again, baby-faced males are tended to be perceived as less able providers for a family. This kind of thing comes up again, perceptions from the face comes up again, in a phenomenon known as gaydar, the alleged ability of men and women to identify just from facial appearance whether somebody is heterosexual or homosexual in orientation. Here's one study by Melissa Lyons and her colleagues. And it turns out that whether you're looking at males or females, these are pictures of self-identified gay or straight men or women. People are more accurate than you'd expect by chance at identifying who's gay and who's straight just by physical appearance. Again, when you start looking at what the cues are, what they're looking for feminine-looking men and masculine-looking women. It's all stereotype, right? But what's happening here, the essential perceptual process, is people reading off the face to try to make inferences about people's internal psychological states. I'm going to skip over this because it's very clear that it's not just the face. There's a whole bunch of other features of body language that indicate what the person's internal states are. There's a famous picture of President Lyndon B. Johnson. Before he was president, he was Senate Majority Leader, and Johnson used to do this to his colleagues to get them to vote his way, right? Using all of his body language to communicate power and intimidation. And finally, it's also dress. Here's a real-world example. These are the stars of the television program Chicago Hope, and you'll see that the three senior physicians, men, okay, are dressed in long white coats. It's called the long white doctor's coat. Here are new medical students at Memorial University of Newfoundland. Medical students get a short white coat. These are physician assistant students graduating from Philadelphia University, all dressed up in their short white coats. You go into a hospital, you look at what the person's wearing. The more authority he or she has, the longer the coat is. Okay? Short coats, less authority. Long coats, more authority. Okay? It's an absolutely spot-on physical cue as to what that person is like. And it's just an example of how we use all the information available from the physical stimulus to make inferences about what that person's internal psychological states, feelings, thoughts, motives, traits, and so on are. Thank you very much. We'll see you on Wednesday, where we'll pick up social memory.